So here's a question to my non-American audience. Have you ever traveled to the US and thought, why does everything taste so sweet? Often bread tastes more like cake and yogurts have more sugar than desserts. Foreigners notice this right away and they're not wrong. American food is loaded with sugar and it's not even their fault. The American food system was intentionally pushed in that direction by one of the biggest nutrition cover-ups ever. That's exactly what happened back in the 1960s when the sugar industry paid off scientists to downplay the dangers of sugar and shift the blame for heart disease onto fat. This single move changed how people ate for decades, and it still shapes a lot of modern American diets. This all started in the 1950s and 60s when rates of heart disease were rising and doctors were trying to figure out why. Two suspects quickly came up: sugar and saturated fat. Both were being studied, but the sugar industry had a big problem. If sugar was blamed, their entire business model would collapse. So they decided to act. They funded studies, they sponsored researchers, and they built relationships with policymakers and health organizations. The goal wasn't necessarily to prove sugar was healthy, it was simply to make sure that the finger of blame pointed somewhere else. And fat made for a perfect scapegoat. For example, internal documents from the Sugar Research Foundation, which today is called the Sugar Association, showed that the sugar industry literally paid Harvard scientists the equivalent of about $50,000 in today's money to publish a review article in a top medical journal. The scientists were Mark Hegstad and Frederick Stair, both from Harvard's Department of Nutrition. They wrote a 1967 paper in the New England Journal of Medicine that reviewed the causes of heart disease. Guess what conclusions they came to? That fat and cholesterol were the big villains, and sugar barely got mentioned. At the time, this journal did not require authors to disclose conflicts of interest, so no one knew the review was secretly funded by the sugar industry. And Hegstad even went on to become the head of nutrition at the Department of Agriculture, so he directly influenced the government's dietary guidelines. This is just crazy stuff, and also keep in mind that fat was an easy target because it's dense in calories and correlated to cholesterol in the blood. The emphasis here is on correlated and not necessarily causal. And it was easy to paint it as a heavy, greasy, and dangerous nutrient. Sugar, on the other hand, was marketed as clean, light, and even energizing. Think about all the ads at the time. Sugar was sold as a quick pick-me-up, even as something doctors might recommend for energy. This shift didn't happen overnight, but slowly you could see it in the research papers, in magazine articles, and eventually in official health advice. By the late 1960s and into the 70s, most of the public conversation about heart disease revolved around saturated fat and dietary cholesterol. Butter, eggs, red meat, those became the villains. Headlines screamed about the dangers of fat clogging arteries, and meanwhile, sugar slipped quietly into the background. It was rarely called out as a major health risk, and in fact, sugar was often portrayed as harmless calories because it was something that you could burn off as long as you stayed active. And this impacted public health a lot. By putting the spotlight on fat instead of sugar, it shaped the next 30 years of nutrition policy. The US government started warning people to avoid fat, so low fat became the holy grail of healthy eating. The first dietary guidelines for Americans in 1980 reflected this thinking, telling people to cut back on fat and cholesterol. Food companies saw a massive opportunity here, and they began pumping out low-fat products. But there was a problem. When you take out the fat, food tends to taste bland. So what did they add instead? More sugar. By the 1980s and 90s, grocery stores were full of products labeled low-fat or fat-free. Yogurts, cookies, salad dressings, cereals, and even snacks like pretzels. They all carried the healthy halo of being low-fat. But most of these products had loads of sugar. A single cup of low-fat fruit yogurt often had more sugar than ice cream. And breakfast cereals marketed to kids were sometimes 40 to 50% sugar by weight. This was the direct result of the sugar industry's manipulation. Instead of questioning sugar, Americans were told that fat was the problem. And because fat was out, sugar was in. This is why to this day, American food tastes overly sweet to many foreigners. In Europe, bread usually isn't sweet at all. In the US, many supermarket breads have sugar or high fructose corn syrup added. You will also notice that tomato sauces and ketchups are a lot sweeter compared to their European counterparts. Often even health foods are packed with it, and portion sizes also exploded. A standard soda size in the 50s was around 7 ounces. By the 2000s, it was normal to get 20 ounces or more. With every increase in portion size came more sugar. Now again, I'm not blaming the American public. If you grow up with these products around you, you're primed to them and your taste buds adjust. But for anyone who didn't grow up in the US, the difference is often shocking. You will notice instantly that American food is sweeter across the board. And of course, the impact on health has been enormous. Between 1970 and 2000, sugar consumption in the US skyrocketed. At the same time, obesity rates more than doubled, and type 2 diabetes cases also soared. Of course, sugar isn't the only factor here, but it clearly played a massive role. And again, the industry's influence isn't just theory. We have the documents to prove it. The biggest reveal came in 2016 when internal memos were made public that showed how the sugar industry discussed how to pay off Harvard scientists and influence science. And there's also follow-up reporting by the New York Times and other outlets that covered these findings widely. Kind of crazy and exactly like something that you would see in a Hollywood movie. So what can we learn from this whole story? The sugar industry cover-up is one of the clearest examples of how money and lobbying can shape nutrition science and public health advice. For decades, fat was painted as the villain, while sugar got a free pass. And that has left a mark on the American food system and public health. That being said, let me wrap up this video by saying that I believe vilifying one single nutrient is always overly simplistic. The truth is, your health isn't determined by one food or one nutrient. It's the big picture of your entire diet that matters the most. Even if the low-fat craze has died down now, a lot of modern diets still vilify some nutrients or food categories to some degree. For example, when it comes to meat eating, you have vegan diets on the one end of the spectrum and carnivore on the other. And if one of them changed your life, then who am I to tell you what to eat? But just keep in mind that the more restrictive your meal plan, the more likely it is to create other imbalances down the line. So for most people, the goal should be to eat more whole, minimally processed foods, to cook more at home, and to be aware of how marketing influences what we are told is healthy. But of course, that's just my 2 cents on it. Let me know what you think about the sugar cover-up and how it has impacted modern dieting, both in the US and maybe even abroad. As always, all related links and videos will be in the description for you to check out.